Okay, so this is the first tutorial in our anime nature series course. Today we are just going to make a simple anime flower. For those of you on the Patreon, the models will be available on the diamond and golden spoon tier lists, so you don't need to worry about modeling it. Without any further ado, let's begin. So let's start with the shader. Delete the basic BSDF and bring in a gradient node and a color ramp. Then I'm going to just crunch the white slider of the color ramp and bring in a mix color. Plug that color ramp into the factor of that mix color and then make the A color a orange hue and the B color a nice blue hue. So what the gradient node is now doing, it is separating the two colors with this color ramp. So you can play around with that if you want. Okay, now duplicate this mix color and plug that mix color into the A socket. This B socket will be our purple color. Duplicate the gradient and color ramp notary, and I'm also going to crunch the black and white sliders a bit more. We are going to make the black more in the middle because we want the blue to appear in the middle a bit more. So the purple will be on the edges of the petals and the blue will be in the middle of the petals with the orange sitting at the bottom. Okay, now plug that mix color into the A socket of another mix color set to multiply, and then bring in another gradient node and Ctrl T that gradient node. We are going to bring in a color ramp in front of it as well. And for this color ramp, bring in a few sliders. We are going to make both ends of the color ramp be white, and in the middle there are going to be two sliders that I'm going to set to a light gray. Because in the middle of each petal, I want to add these nice streaks that you see on these petals. So bring in a noise texture, bring in a color ramp, set it to constant, and then crunch the color values in the middle. Then Ctrl T that noise texture. Make sure you lower the scale, up the detail, and then edit the Y value of the mapping node to around 19 and lower the X value to around 0.5. Duplicate that mix color we had set to multiply earlier and change the color of the B socket to white, and then plug that gradient notary in the factor with the noise texture notary in the A socket, because now that gradient notary controls where this noise texture appears. Okay, and then after you plug that entire notary we just made into the B socket of that multiply, that is going to darken the areas in which our noise texture resides. Okay, so what I'm doing now is I'm just Ctrl T'ing each gradient node because I do not want the gradient to be skew. As you can see on each petal, it is a bit more skew. So I Ctrl T'd the gradient nodes and rotated it on the Y-axis until they were all a bit more uniform. Okay, I'm going to Ctrl J it so that it becomes its own group, and then bring in another mix color. What I'm going to do now is add some extra effects around the petals. So bring in a mix color set to color dodge and plug that entire shader we made earlier into the A socket. Make sure your ambient occlusion is set on because I'm going to bring in another ambient occlusion, and in front of it I'm going to add a color ramp. So now what you're going to see is when you crunch it, the ambient occlusion allows the edges of the petals to be affected. So all I need to do now is invert that color so that they are white on the edges of the model, and then plug that into the B socket. So since it's set to color dodge, it adds some nice lighting effect at the edge of each petal, which is pretty nice. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in a diffuse shader plugged into a shader to RGB that is plugged into a color ramp. I'm going to plug that into the factor of this mix color set to color dodge, because now whenever you bring in a light, this edge lights up, not the entire model, just the edges of the mesh, which is quite nice because you get this nice halo effect wherever light shines. Bring in a mix color set to multiply. Then we can duplicate our ambient occlusion tree, and then we can set another mix color in front of it, plugging that color ramp into the A socket, bringing a gradient node into the factor with a color ramp in front of it, and make both ends of the color ramp white, while placing 2 black sliders in the middle and slightly to the left. This is so that the ambient occlusion only affects the middle side of each petal, where the contact is most extreme between each mesh. As you can see, it looks like there are some contact shadows on this flower. So now we have the edge effect that applies whenever there is a light source nearby, and we also have the shadow effect between each mesh. So now we are going to add the finishing touches to our model. If you have a Goo engine, you can do this final step. Bring in the curvature node, plug the color ramp in front of it, and crunch the white all the way to the left. Lower the samples at the top to around 1 and the lower samples to around 0.2. Okay, now bring in a shader to RGB and an emission behind it so that we can control the brightness of this curvature node, and plug that into the B socket. I accidentally plugged it into the A socket, but I'm going to switch it right now. Okay, set that mix color to color dodge, and then you can now control it with the factor. Okay, so now what we can do is we just edit it as much as we want. So there's like a slight edge on this flower, and the edge increases whenever there is a light source near it. But that is the entire node tree of our flower. Okay, now we can do the plant under the flower, the stem. It's pretty simple. It's basically just a diffuse shader, a shader to RGB, a color ramp set to constant, and a mix color. We plug that entire tree into the factor of the mix color and set the A socket to whatever color you want the shadow to be, while setting the B socket to whatever color you want the mesh to have when it's in light. After doing that, bring in another mix color, setting that to color dodge, plug that entire shader tree into the A socket, and make the B socket a nice lighter green. Then afterwards, you can duplicate that diffuse shader node tree and plug that into the factor. Because now whenever there's extreme light by the model, there will be small highlights of that lighter green color on the stem, which is pretty nice. Okay, now for the darker texture of the flower, I'm literally just going to change the colors in the model, barely anything else. I'm just going to lower the brightness of the colors within the shader and change the colors a little bit more so that it's not dull. I'm just going to change the centerpiece, which is literally just an emission shader, making it less bright, and in bringing in a hue and saturation node at the end of the entire tree to heighten the saturation a little bit. But that is it for our flower models. It's a little bit complicated, but once you get all your techniques in order, then I'm pretty sure you could figure out ways to do things similar to this with your own shader trees. But that is it for our first anime nature tutorial, and inshallah there will be many more to come in future for the Patreon. But that is it for me today. Hope you guys enjoyed, and see you in the next one. On it, bye.